We talked about a year ago, maybe it was longer, about the way that the people who live in digital world made their way into what they would call meat land. So these are people who live in the Ideaville. That is creating codes and fake worlds. The mRNA is code. And they coded it up and stuck it in people's bodies. That's making their way into meat world. And I'm looking at some commonalities in this election and so many of the weird partnerships. I mean, Elon Musk is going to be deciding upon government efficiencies. It looks like Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s role is real. We know about the chemical surgical mutilation of kids that has to stop. It's stopped everywhere else but here, and it's on full blast here. And the country was saved from an executive order to force parents to give up their kids to the gender cult. And I'm looking at this alignment, and I'm thinking about some scripture. Just before the show, Alex and I pray. And I said, I don't know how to work God's word into this. And God just said, dummy, I told you yesterday, wake up, son. So we'll do that. And we'll work this around the title. We have to come up with the titles the day before. And sometimes I don't know what God's going to have me say. The title of the podcast is The Election Almost Destroyed the Mockingbird Media, How Trump Can Finish the Job. We'll certainly talk about that a lot. But I think we'll start where I just began, because there was a tiny little body with a tiny little beating heart that I think made an enormous statement. And I bet it was on behalf of God. Talk about this with the help of Bulwark Capital Management, KnowYourRiskRadio.com, and, of course, with God Almighty.
The Todd Herman Show is 100% disapproved by big pharma, technocrats, and tyrants everywhere. No. From the high mountains of free America, here's the Emerald City exile, Todd Herman.
Today is the day the Lord has made, and these are the times to which God has decided we shall live. The crossing over into Meatland is something I need to be careful about because, good portions of these shows, I think we put all the shows now up on YouTube. All the shows, okay, so I got to be very careful. And we can get into this really, really deeply on Substack. I just talked election integrity this morning on the Substack page. Yesterday we went deep, really deep into COVID. Or is that today? I think that's today. So you can sign up for that at the toddhermanshow.substack.com, and no censorship there. I like the platform. They're just not ready to really do business with a podcast like ours that's ad-supported. So we can't use them that way anymore. So I'll be very careful here that people who work in the realm of ideas, in theory, because that's what code is. I mean, code, yeah, it's housed in hardware, but it's at best synthetic. It's not touchable. And when people began to understand our bodies and look at the grace, the brilliance of God's design with our DNA and the human genome, they quickly came to realize, like I did, and I'm a intellectual chimpanzee, and I figured this out in 2009 because I had a lot of time on my hands, and I was sitting and thinking about DNA. It was because my family was not in D.C. with me. So at that point, I had a lot of time on my hands at night, and I started to think about computer code because I was working in tech at the time. And it occurred to me that DNA is code. Wow, I'm not the first guy to figure that out. But I went and got the book, Signature in the Cell by Dr. Stephen Meyer, utterly mind-blowing. The best book ever explaining the theory of intelligent design. So if a chimpanzee, rodeo clown like me, can figure this out, of course, people with science heads figured it out. And then the process became, let's take the code that God wrote. Of course, they would pretend that Darwinianism created. And let's use that to store information for us. Someone, on the other hand, turned around and said, okay, but let's start coding. Let's type out code. Let's produce it and call it medicine and put it in people. Now, I believe God looked at that as a turning point. He knew would occur. He knows all things. And you have people looking to vandalize the human form in multiple arenas. The obsession with mosquito-bound or mosquito-distributed so-called vaccines to vaccinate you against your will, that is flatly, inarguably immoral. And it's messing with the human body, which is one thing that we have that Satan doesn't. He doesn't have a body. And he hated ours. Hate. You can look at the assault of bodies in the way that euthanasia has been expanded in Canada. Now, if you're fat and sad, you can get euthanized, even if you're 19, because God knows it can't get better. It is present in the chemical and surgical mutilation of confused kids. I saw a great post this morning that kids are not born with an innate belief in the Easter Bunny and an innate belief in Santa Claus. And they eventually age out of that. Even if you kept telling them, no, there's a Santa, eventually kids are going to go, you're nuts. There's no Santa. But they're not any longer, in many cases, allowed to age out of gender confusion, which is, again, people who live in the realm of theory making their way across the border into the realm of our bodies. This has been happening with foods. It happened with the food pyramid. If you want to know why there's a type 2 diabetes phenomena in America, look no further than the food pyramid. If you want to understand why there are cancer issues, now this is me, and look, I get it. I'm not a doctor. I should make that clear just for the people who are doing their jobs at YouTube. You're just doing your jobs. I need to stop calling you censors. You're just doing your jobs. In my opinion, there's a lot of medical research that shows that you want to understand cancers, look at food. You want to understand so many of our problems, look at inflammation, which is caused by massive amounts of sugar in our bodies. The amount of sugar that the average American eats every year, refined, and this doesn't count sugars occurring naturally in foods, is something like 6 to 8 pounds. Think of that. 6 to 8 pounds of refined sugar. It doesn't count. Sugar that's incidental in milk and fruit juice and fruits and to some degree in vegetables and potatoes. There's so many things that add up to sugar, or that I should say define down into sugar. So this tiny little body, I think this tiny little body made this statement. And I'm looking at some commonalities. RFK Jr. tweeted something. And there's a couple things he's tweeted. And it's one tweet one or two messages in one tweet that really got my attention. And we'll show that in a second. Our bodies, of course, given to us by God, our temple, we're to treat them well. And there's a way you can do this and add to the godliness. And that is to use Allen soaps instead of the big soap company they're using now. I'll make this super simple. It's better soap. It's made in America. It's all natural. The company exists really, well, obviously to produce great soap. That's why they found this family with 3 generations of soap making expertise. That's why it's all natural. That's why they do massive quality control. But the underlying mission is to respect the bodies and minds and souls of young people who people like Kamala Harris would say, toss them out. If you don't succeed in killing them in the womb, then get them into a government institution and store them in a box. That's what they would do with these people. And yet they're great people. They're smart, they're joyful, they have their moments where they're non-joyful, but they're also young people. Kids, in 2 out of 3 cases, they're kids. And they work at Allen's. So you can make a change, clean your body, keep the temple pure using Allen soaps instead of some big company that doesn't care about these values. It's allensoaps.com/Todd. allensoaps.com/Todd. Here's RFK Jr.'s statement, one of them. FDA's war on public health is about to end. This includes its aggressive suppression of psychedelics. I'm not a big fan there. Peptides, stem cells, raw milk, hyperbaric therapies, chelating compounds, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, vitamins, clean food, sunshine, exercise, nutraceuticals, and anything else that advances human health and can't be patented by pharma. If you work for the FDA and part of this corrupt system, I have 2 messages for you. Number 1, preserve your records. Number 2, pack your bags. President Trump, incidentally, speaking of demanding resignations, has already proactively demanded the resignation of all military leaders who were responsible for the Afghanistan disaster. Great. Awesome to hear. Accountability is coming. But if you go through what RFK Jr. spoke about here, the suppression of psychedelics. Now, I bet I know what he's talking about here. There are really promising bits of research that show that psychedelics at a microdosing amount can help men and women who have had PTSD injuries and traumatic brain injuries. I know of people who are using this post-combat TBI. And in these microdoses, it helps with mood control, stabilization. It brings back a sense of joy to people. The danger is, of course, people go, wow, that's good. I want more. And why don't I add alcohol to this? But it's far, far better. I'd far rather have people on these mushrooms, and I mean just the mushrooms, than the garbage that I gave into putting our daughter on. Because these things are far less addictive. They're not designed to be chemically addictive. I contend that the antidepressants of today are absolutely 100% designed to be addictive. And I think one day the world will know this. Peptides. These things occur very naturally in the human body. And you used to be able to buy them. And what were they good for? Well, they're used to sometimes help suppress cancers. They're sometimes used to help accelerate the immune system. And there are people like me who would use these peptides because at my age, I still want to lift weights and I still want to run and do gymnastics. I still, that's a joy creator for me. Well, they banned these time and time and time again, but I was at a place the other day and they're good people. And I was just talking to them about their business model and they offered to put me on a very powerful steroid. And I said, what? Yeah, this one's legal right now. And man, if you want to be lean and ripped, this thing will get you there in like 6 months. I said, nah, I'm not going to get into this steroid stuff. You know, I use testosterone, I use some HGH, but no, I'm not going to get into steroids. But that's available, but peptides aren't. Stem cells. You know where I've been going to Mexico to get the ethically gathered stem cells, nothing to do with abortion, raw milk. What did God design milk as? He designed it to be consumed raw. And if you're working with a responsible creator of these foods, you're unlikely to get sick from this. There are people who just consume raw milk. My friend Nikki, Philippi, all she does, she has raw milk, period, and she's done it for what is she? She's like 35 years old, done it for decades. Hyperbaric therapies. You go through the list, all of them, aside from hyperbaric therapies, and so far, we're not to anything here that's man-made. I mean, ivermectin is a compound that's man-derived and improved. Hydroxychloroquine is about as pure as you can get. I mean, yes, it's man-improved. Vitamins, clean food, sunshine, exercise. The FDA told people to stay away from the sun during the COVID lockdown. That's what they told you. Stay inside. They told you to stay inside with other people in a stuffed setting, wearing a face diaper. So this is I could just see God putting together this unpredictable partnership where RFK Jr. is clearly, I mean, I don't think President Trump can go back on an offer now with RFK Jr. because he's basically established himself as, yes, I am this guy. But this tiny little body, this is what nailed it for me. And it's a pretty spectacular example of what God can decide to do. Hey, if you're listening to this and not yet watching this, can I ask you please to subscribe to our YouTube channel? Please do that. Here's the reason why, is the more of you who are subscribed and the more often you interact and play this, it's an easy way to share the show with friends. My ego, my dislike of Alphabet, the company that owns YouTube, my understanding of the differences with YouTube and their point of view and ours, and I have a real issue about having my speech controlled But by subscribing to that, the numbers grow. We're harder to cancel. And it allows us to reach people outside of our bubble. Your presence on the YouTube channel actually allows us to start reaching more and more people outside of our bubble just by virtue of numbers and views. Secondly, it's an easy way to consume the content. Now, the free speech stuff, that's on Substack. But here's the YouTube channel. It's so easy. It's youtube.com/at The Todd Herman Show. So easy. youtube.com/at The Todd Herman Show. And please do that and comment and use the videos and share them. I cannot help but think of the lilies in the field in this tiny, tiny little body. Because at the show, I said at the beginning, I was talking to Alex about, I was praying, and I said at the time during the prayer, Lord, I don't know how to put your word at the center. And he just said to me, you're so, sometimes I don't know what to do with you. I'm going to grab you by the ears and shake you. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29. And God said, behold, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. So he equipped us from the very beginning with the common blessings of food, water, and air. What has big food and big pharma coming together done? It's raised generations of people who have consumed compounds never meant to be consumed. So many of the vegetable oils and seed oils, if you think about how hard it would be to actually create seed oils without massive amounts of processing and work, that should indicate to you that God said, this is hard to get for a reason. It's hard to get honey for a reason. It's precious, it's useful, it's a great compound for immune systems and wounds. Honey's remarkable. It's hard to get for a reason. Great friendships are hard to get for a reason. A great marriage is hard to have for a reason. We don't always understand the reasons. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have God, in whom you have God? You're not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. Now, there's so much in relation to that. There's the don't defile yourself sexually, don't defile yourself with curse words. And it's, the Lord said it's not really what enters the body, but what come out of the body that defiles it, our words. And still, if I'm thinking about meat land versus idea land, this quote from RFK Jr. comes back and it's more and more potent to me than this tiny little body. It's funny. Kamala Harris, who does not exist, who is a collection of words on a teleprompter. She's the equivalent of words tossed out on a salad plate. What's Kamala Harris? She's those words on a salad plate. She's getting ready to give her gracious, so gracious, acceptance of loss speech, her concession speech. And people have been saying this is photoshopped or this is a deep fake. It's not, because there's multiple angles of it. If you've not seen this yet, it's glorious. And I didn't put the music on. It was there. It's a squirrel. She's getting ready to speak, and there is a squirrel walking around. I'm wondering how many people in Washington, D.C., or I guess she was at a college. She was at her alma mater, the traditionally black college. I wonder how many people there understood what I think is the significance of this. And maybe it's just me, but it's not. There's millions and millions of people who saw this, but I'm thinking about the lilies in the field. I'm thinking about a sparrow. The Lord telling us, why are you worrying? By worry, do you add 1 day to your life? 1 hour to your life? Does my Father in heaven not value you more than the sparrows? And yet he created the sparrows. And the Lord had told us that the Lord, his Father, Jesus, when he walked the earth, my Father desires mercy, not sacrifice. I think what the officials in New York did on that day where they went and got into that guy's house, had a warrant to kill his squirrel and his raccoon, who were harming absolutely nobody. I think it was God with a great big sense of humor, using the timing that way, because it translated in absolutely new ways for people. And incidentally, this isn't Photoshopped, it's not deep fake. This is another angle of the squirrel. This time it's shot head on. This little buddy pops out of there. Looks a lot like the squirrel in New York. Goes across the stage. And very few people at Howard College, I think, were recognizing the significance of this. What got into the head of those people? Decided to dispatch armed officials to go interrogate a guy, to go through his house in order to kill a squirrel. Now, I don't believe that God goes around wringing his hands about squirrels. First of all, he knows where they go when they die. Secondly, you're not stopping the death of the squirrel by not eating it or not eating things. You're not stopping the death of an animal. You are deciding when it dies. But I don't think God's a big fan of, why'd you kill that squirrel? No, why? To eat? You didn't eat that squirrel. What was that family doing that was wrong? Do you know that I put the love of animals into them? Do you know I actually love animals? There is a great book called The List. And it's Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. And it is biblical fiction, historical fiction, inspired by the facts of the Bible. And the writers imagine a friendship between Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, both of whom were apparently secret Christians. They came upon it. A tradition in this book says, separately, Nicodemus was a Pharisee. Joseph of Arimathea was a powerful and rich man. I don't know how powerful, but rich. And they meet up, and Nicodemus had been keeping a list, hence the list. He'd been tracking the Lord Jesus, the Messiah. He thought he was the Messiah, so he created this list, this checklist. And he got to know Joseph of Arimathea because Joseph was perhaps going to become a Pharisee to get on the board. And as they're going through and getting to know one another, it's like back in the COVID days, you would check with people before you started talking lockdowns and masks. You kind of see where they're at. And then finally you could open up and begin talking about things. And Joseph of Arimathea is harder to convince that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, but he's finally getting there. And after Lazarus died and the Lord Jesus had raised him from the dead, Joseph of Arimathea was riding outside the city gates. And he comes upon some people walking outside the city gates, and he's up on his high horse. That's really important, his high horse. And he realizes that the people approaching him are Jesus Christ and some of his followers. And so he stops. And the Lord Jesus approaches him. And Joseph of Arimathea says, they're going to kill you. You got to be in hiding. They're going to kill you. And the Lord smiles. And then he puts his hand on the head of Joseph of Arimathea's horse. And he pets its jaw. And the horse puts his head on its shoulder, on the Lord Jesus' shoulder. And the Lord cradles the horse. And then he lets it go. And he looks up at Joseph of Arimathea with a peaceful smile and walks on. And Joseph of Arimathea realizes, he sees this young man standing there. He goes, "Are you Lazarus?" He goes, "Yeah." "They're going to kill you too." And Lazarus said, "What are you waiting for?" Joseph said, "What?" He goes, "What are you waiting for? You know who he is." So perhaps I'm a drama king. I've been accused of that. That's probably true. But do you see it differently? A blatantly anti-Christian, anti-God, I think satanic woman gives an acceptance speech in an election where God's hand was all over this. The protection of President Trump, the thwarting of the will of the most powerful intelligence gathering surveillance state in the world. That's us. That's not China. That's us. All of the Mockingbird media aligned against him. Every significant portion of academia aligned against him. The governors of states trying to imprison him. AGs of states trying to imprison him. And he is left unscathed and has done better in the election. Some of this was moderating, stepping back from abortion, etc. I don't think he's going to undo what he did. Supreme Court decision stands. And then a squirrel. A tiny little body. And so many people can't be convinced because of the tiny little human bodies. But they can be convinced because of a tiny little squirrel's body. The Lord created heaven and earth and said, it is good. He didn't say, except for those stinking rodents. One day when we're in heaven, I can't wait to sit there. Well, I don't know if you'll sit there. I don't know how it works. When you get to heaven, I wonder if knowledge is just unlocked. You get there and you go, oh, of course. Whereas you spend time around the literal truth. You go, oh, that's why you made squirrels. Oh. Anyway, it happens, it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool. So when we talk about natural things and we talk about the ingredients to help our bodies and our temple, there are companies that use nature responsibly. They're not pharma companies. They take compounds that have been robbed from us in our food system and they replace them. Because of the perversion of our food system and the food pyramids and corporate farming, etc., we do not get access to some really, really important compounds. This is where Bioptimizers came into play. They're a company created because the founders of Bioptimizers messed their bodies up. They spent 20, maybe 25 years as competitive bodybuilders, both of them world class. In the case of Wade, he was a world champion bodybuilder as a vegetarian. So hard to do. Obviously in the natural class, no steroids, no meat. And when he and Matt got done with that as a career, their bodies were wrecked because our bodies are not designed for bulk cut, bulk cut, bulk cut competition. And they had a mess up of their immune systems and so much. So they shifted the focus of their company from creating supplements for athletes to compounds to help people just calm their bodies down. They expanded from elite athletes to folks like us, and that's where I met them. And I've been using their products now for about 3 years. Complete trust in the company. They go all in for Black Friday. This is a really fun time of year for them. They're always trying to think of ways to make Black Friday a time where new people try their products or existing customers get deals of a lifetime. So here's what you can get when you go to bioptimizers.com/Todd and use promo code Todd. You have to use promo code Todd during this sale. You unlock up to $100 worth of free gifts, and they love sending these to people. You get an additional 10% off the special 3-product bundle that's currently 15% off. So that's a total of 25% off. And you get a year-long guarantee, 365-day money-back guarantee. The 3 compounds are Pre3OM, which is a powerful prebiotic to make sure that you get the most nutrition out of all foods you eat. Masszymes. The core benefit of Masszymes is it helps your body produce more amino acids. One study showed up to, it showed 1,200% more amino acids in your bodies. Amino acids being the building block of proteins, proteins being the building block of muscle, and then magnesium breakthrough. The undisputed champion in my judgment of helping people relax into sleep. So choose your health this Friday. Go to bioptimizers.com/Todd. Use code Todd to save an extra 10% on the special 3-product bundle and get your chance for up to $100 in free gifts. Bioptimizers.com/Todd. You got to use promo code Todd to get this insane Black Friday level savings. So the other thing I noticed about this election is the harder the Mockingbird media shouted Nazi and Hitler, and literally Hitler, and the reincarnation of Hitler and rapist and felon, the less people heard it. There's an other thing that's a really, really interesting indicator. The Mockingbird media is not reporting this, but Alex Berenson did some fascinating analysis. Blue states that had the toughest, most draconian lockdown masking laws shifted to Trump. A huge shift in California. Now, correlation is not causation, but the correlation is very, very tight. The people in Idea Land shifted over to Meat Land, and God said, yeah, maybe now's the time I'm not going to let you vandalize their bodies. I think I've had enough of the temple vandalizing. Mockingbird media is not talking about they can't. But let's go through some of the ways they did talk about these things, and let's talk about a Mockingbird media that is very nearly dead after what they did to themselves during this election, and how President Trump can help finish this off.
Doing the math, I think I've been covering Trump now for going on a decade, dare I say. I have never heard his messaging as dark as it has been in recent weeks. You mentioned last night. We also, Tony just mentioned today, we saw the former president cast his ballot there in Florida, where he falsely claimed yet again fraud in 2020. And he talked again with lies about criminal migrants, he said, pouring through our border. That is just factually untrue. But it's important that we talk about what he has done with race in this campaign since the very beginning, because it's really been unlike anything we have seen in modern political history. He has suggested that migrants have bad genes, that they are poisoning the blood of our country.
So he hasn't suggested any such thing. What he has said very correctly and very factually is that we are not requiring any health checks on these people. And we're not. It's not their fault that they have hepatitis. It's not their fault that they're coming in with trench disease. They're from countries that are utterly fallen. He didn't say they're poisoning our genes. President Trump did not claim vote fraud with no evidence. We just talked about evidence at the top of the show. It doesn't close the case. But there is evidence of fraud. What they're doing to themselves here is great news. What the president and his team need to do is freeze every single communication with the Mockingbird media and government staff. All of it's theirs. When they find what they will find, in my judgment, which is obscene levels of cooperation, and we get down to message crafting. I know Barack Hussein Obama apparently signed this executive order to make propaganda legal, so let the government create propaganda. President Trump should absolutely undo that executive order and undo it on day one. But I don't know that they can get past politicizing the propaganda. Here's what I mean. It's not on behalf of government, because you can make a reasonable, though completely immoral, case that it's okay for so-called public health officials to issue what we think is propaganda, and they're saying, no, this is for the public good. And you can make that defense in court. It's immoral, amoral, wrong, but you could make that case, and a good lawyer could convince a jury. Not when it comes to winning elections on behalf of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You then prove a government that is completely taken over by the left is using its power and or money to drive coverage further and further and further to the left in the Mockingbird media. Now you have a massive Federal Election Commission crime of coordinated in-kind donations in the billions and billions of dollars realm, depending on how long this has been going on. That material needs to be brought into a special investigator, and then the people responsible for this in the newsrooms need to be brought before Congress to talk, not about their ability to have free speech. Of course they have free speech. But they don't get to be running a political op funded by our tax dollars when it's going towards one party. I think we could prove that. And if that happened, at the very least, you'd have some ways to talk to independents and liberals about the fact that they're being victimized by these people. CBS News talked about something, one of their greatest hits, President Trump doing what with violence?
Cecilia Vega, you did a great report for 60 Minutes on Pennsylvania. What have you learned tonight?
Well, this isn't, Nora, thank you. This isn't a mistake. This is a strategy from the former president. He is laying the groundwork to challenge the results, and he did it in 2020, and he started this with Pennsylvania months ago and basically has been doing it all day. Look no further than his ally, his close advisor, Steve Bannon, who said Trump should preemptively claim victory. And we just heard from special counsel filings a few days ago that in 2020, Bannon said just because Trump claims victory, it doesn't mean he's the winner, but he's still going to say it anyway. This is all a strategy to sow doubt. And the folks in Pennsylvania, the governor there said they are very legitimately worried about the damage that this could do, the potential for violence in the streets that we could see as a result of this, because people get whipped into a frenzy because the former president has told them their vote has not been taken seriously. There are real consequences to lies like this.
Washington, D.C. was a peaceful place in 2016. Right? A mob attacked the city. It burned private property. I'll never forget the burning of this legal immigrants limo. Those are like $100,000 cars. And oftentimes drivers have those instead of houses. Their families live in 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, 5 to 6 people, but they have that car they're paying off. And they burned it. And I don't need to talk about the violence around the country that was organized top down. Black Lives Matter Incorporated and Antifa. And if you doubt it's organized top down, read Andy Ngo's book about Antifa. And then look at the funding of Black Lives Matter Incorporated. Then read the Time magazine article where they bragged about saving democracy by rigging an election. I didn't say stole, I said rigging. And it's their article, not mine. They talked about changing the rules. They talked in that article about being ready to call for more street violence. President Trump needs to make sure that all these records are retained, that everybody's put on notice, that we are going to look through every single bit of communication on all of the big topics. The Russia hoax, stay home, stay safe, masks work. Again, those things you could make a reasonable defense for. A good lawyer could make that defense, but not when it comes to an in-kind donation to a political party, the Democrat Party. Because there's going to be payoffs coming back. I know Washington, D.C. to be a town of favors. You do for me. When I first got there, and I think this is why he came at me. There was a journalist there who wrote a hit piece against me, really kind of nasty hit piece, and it ended up on MSNBC. And I was voted in. I was second place on Oberman's Worst Person in the World show, but I lost to a shark, which is kind of an insult in itself, losing to a shark, because that's not a person. I don't know if Oberman knows that. It's a fish. But he wrote this hit piece on me. He was the same journalist who contacted me when I got there, called me. I mean, pretty famous dude. I picked up the phone. Hello, hey, it's this guy. And I'm not saying that because it was a private communication. I just don't do that. And I said, hey, hi, I know who you are. Hey, listen, can we get together for lunch? I know you're new in town, and I don't know if you know the way D.C. works, but I'd like to get to know you and what you're doing there and maybe do some coverage about what you're doing. And so from time to time, people will give me information on their organizations that can kind of help me craft a better narrative. And sometimes they have concerns about the organization, and they'll use me as a way to keep the organization in check. And in that way, then I can write some things about what you're doing, and you might get a more fair approach. And I said, I don't trust you at all, or your organization, or anything to do with you. No, I'm not going to take the meeting. Thank you for calling. What was the deal? You leaked to me. I write cool things about you. That was the offer. Jonathan Capehart has worked in and around Washington, D.C. most of his career, Washington Post, PBS guy. He was the guy who watched as a talk show host walked out on him. Got up and left. Guy's been in the business for years, Hugh Hewitt. Hugh fell for the COVID stuff hard, man. Someone reminded me that the other day. Here's Jonathan Capehart.
I come to elections with a sense of humility, simply because, polls don't vote, people vote. And so in elections, we finally get to hear what the American people have to say. And I've come to this election with an open mind, and I want to know what the American people have to say. What was it, 6 hours ago, I was mystified by what was going on. And now I can't help but think that if this election seems to be, if it proves out that the millions of people who are watching Fox News, if that ends up being the case, then I can't help but wonder if the American people have given up on democracy.
They gave up on democracy by going to vote. They gave up on democracy by going to vote. He works with PBS. President Trump needs to go to National Public Radio and PBS and tell them, you will hire conservatives in editorial capacities. You're going to change the intellectual complexion of your board of directors. And of course, they're going to scream and they're going to holler. He's also going to go into, and should, every single communication that's ever happened in public radio, NPR, PBS, because anytime the taxpayers, anytime the federal government gives money to an organization, they seize control. That's why we have these school boards around the country doing things they know are insane. There are people who sit on school boards who know it's insane to put a testosterone-driven 14-year-old boy in a shower with girls. They know it's insane. And they'll tell you privately, look, we know. We don't want to do this, but the federal government will sue us. If they don't sue us, the ACLU will, and the federal government will help them. We'll be ruined. And that's how the feds do it. So taxpayer money goes into PBS. We get to look at everything at PBS, all communications. And this should go straight to the House and the Senate. You are going to have intellectual parity on your boards and in your editorial room, period. Or we're going to withdraw all funding. And PBS will be fine, and National Public Radio will be fine, but we won't be paying for the propaganda anymore. There's so much to do to finish off the Mockingbird media that's just about finishing itself off, but let's make it happen more quickly and more decisively. Fraud is fraud. On November 21st, which is next week, Thursday, 3:30, my friend Zach Abraham, you see and hear on our program nearly every Friday, is giving his first post-election free live webinar. It's also the last one of the year. So he knows, of course, as we all do, that President Trump's going to be in office. What is this likely to do to your retirement account? What's likely to happen if he does allow RFK Jr. to go after Big Pharma? The rumor is the big five pharma companies had a meeting. They all got their lawyers together and started planning for what does it look like with an RFK Jr. If he's allowed to go after him, God willing, what does that do to your retirement account? Because it's not going to be all good unless you are practicing risk management. Bulwark Capital Management does this through actively managing every portfolio, which can reduce risk and volatility. And he's going to share with you, Zach will, how the fund has done this past year, what it looks like next year, how they practice risk management, and what's likely to unfold. Say, for instance, if President Trump does, as Zach and I are going to talk about tomorrow, what if he does loosen the restraints on nuclear power? Can you imagine? A bunch of micro-nuclear plants around the country? You better get in line for that. Now, this is a free live webinar, but you have to register to attend, so go to knowyourriskradio.com. That's KNOW, knowyourriskradio.com.
Investment advisory services offered through Trek Financial LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. Any references to performance of securities are thought to be materially accurate, and actual performance may differ. Investments involve risk and are not guaranteed. Past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Trek 24308.
On MSNBC, they had several things to blame for Kamala Harris's defeat. And here's some of them.
Again, of the 7 swing states that we and everybody else has been watching, we now have an NBC News call in the first one, Joy. North Carolina called for Donald Trump.
Yep. And so it was, you know, it's a state that I think Democrats definitely were reaching for. There was a lot of work to try to turn out the college campuses, which were really thick and really packed, and try to turn out the suburbs. And I think there was a lot of hope because of just the insanity, can we say fairly, of the person who's running for governor in that state, and a thought that, you know, defeating him would also carry Harris in. But in the end, you know, if they didn't make their numbers and essentially exceed the numbers that Joe Biden had in the suburbs, and I think we have to be blunt about why. Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. That is what it appears happened in that state, is that if you can't flip enough white women, and we've talked about this on this set numerous times, is that you have a state where you've got a 6-week abortion or a 12-week abortion. I think theirs might be 12 weeks. Yep. But it's a state where women lost their reproductive rights, where there was a very heavy push to get women to focus on not putting in place, you know, re-electing, putting back into the White House the person who was responsible for taking those rights away and restoring them. But that message obviously was not enough to get enough white women to vote for Vice President Harris, a fellow woman. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy. And, you know, God bless Shannon Watts, who has tried to have that conversation. But if people aren't receptive to it, and if people vote more you know, party line or more on race than on gender and on protecting their gender, there's really not much more that you can do but tell people what the risks are. And
voting on race and gender. Question. What will happen more in the life of every woman, white or black? A, having an abortion. B, spending time with their kids. C, buying groceries. Not every woman is going to have an abortion. Even if they do, they may later have kids. They'll interact with those kids on a daily basis, God willing. So they don't want their kids subject to gender madness. They don't want their girls in locker rooms with boys. They don't want their girls' sports teams polluted with boys. They don't want their cities overrun with crime. You have women who then have kids and have never had an abortion. They're going to interact with their kids far more often because they'll have 0 abortions. All of those women will spend more time buying groceries than they will aborting kids. And the patriarchy. You know who's the prime patriarchy for most women? The man with whom they live. And in one-income households, it's the man who gets to go to work every day, sometimes doing something they hate because they have to, because it's their job to feed their families. That's the patriarchy. On the topic of MSNBC, it's the same thing. It's the same technique. I'd like to know who is making up for the income that NBC's losing. I'd like to understand foreign influence in this. Now, we should be able to, from a government perspective and a national security perspective, begin looking into foreign funding of our media companies. We should be able to look into BlackRock and Vanguard and Soros, and we should be able to begin to examine the money just from a national security perspective. Do a national security review of their licenses. There's still an FCC license for MSNBC and NBC. They still go out over antennas, not for much longer. The FCC doesn't intend to give that control, so use it. We're going to do a national security investigation because you'll notice that all the things the Chinese Communist Party wants us to do as a country, DEI, gender madness, division by race, our borders overrun, are all the things that MSNBC promotes. Are they being paid to do that? It's time to find out. It's not a free speech thing. If you want to spout off as Joy Reid does, do it. If you're getting paid by the Chinese Communist Party to do it, then we have an issue from national security perspective. Van Jones talked about the election and what happened. This is Van Jones, and he has his point of view. A whole bunch of isms, don't you know?
I'm thinking about the people who are not a part of anybody's elite who are hurting tonight. There are African-American women who know a little bit about being talked down to and know a little bit about having their economic dreams crushed.
You ain't black if you don't vote for me.
Who tried to dream a big dream over the past couple of months. And tonight they're trading in a lot of hope for a lot of hurt. And they were hoping that maybe this time, one of their own could be seen as.
Barack Obama is not a black woman? Who says? Why do you get to decide that? He's black. One could make an argument he's more black than Kamala Harris. One of their own?
Worthy. And once again, they were facing rejection. And
No, they weren't rejected. Black women weren't rejected. A uniquely unlikable fake human being was rejected. Kamala Harris is uniquely unlikable and uniquely empty. Van Jones, by the way, this is a very good thing he's doing here. I mean, it's awful, filled with lies, but man, he's good at it.
it hurts. They thought tomorrow morning they're going to walk out with their shoulders back a little bit, maybe able to breathe for the first time and feel like they belong someplace. They did everything that they knew how to do. And it's going to be harder than it should be tomorrow for them to hold their heads up. And they're not the only people who are hurting tonight. If you're a parent of a trans kid, your child's face was used as a springboard to power for somebody.
Wow. A party that stands on the mutilated chests of little girls who become women says it's power seeking for President Trump to say, we're not going to do that to kids anymore. The people in the realm of theory crossed over into the realm of our bodies. I wonder if that's why President Trump said, you know what? I wonder if that's why God said, you know what? I'm going to protect President Trump's body. I'm going to make it obvious. I'm going to create a strange bedfellow situation. Bring Robert F. Kennedy Jr. into this and use him. I don't think RFK Jr. knows the Lord. Lord knows him. I'm going to bring in an Elon Musk. And we'll show you plans for efficiencies and a complete changing over of the so-called public health system. And hopefully President Trump, in a way that's legal and moral, will use legal, moral tactics to finish off the Mockingbird media so it could one day be reborn as journalism. After all, God himself is truth. This is the Todd Herman Show. Please go be well, be strong, be kind, and please make every effort to walk in the light of Christ.